Hey guys, tonight we begin with the brutally dehumanizing, legally sanctioned, and thoroughly soul-crushing world of Roman slavery. The civilization that gave us aqueducts, roads, and an economic system built entirely on the backs of people who had fewer rights than a decorative vase. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from and what time it is for you. It is always fascinating to see who is joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up, not because you are rested, not because the sun gently coaxed you awake. You wake up because someone is kicking your ribs and yelling at you in Latin. It is still dark outside. The stars are still visible through the cracks in the wooden ceiling of the slave quarters. Your body aches in places you didn't know could ache. You are lying on a thin straw mat that has been reused so many times. It is essentially fossilized. The smell hits you immediately. A fragrant blend of unwashed bodies, human waste from the corner bucket, and something that might be rotting food. Or a rotting person, hard to tell. Welcome to morning in ancient Rome, where your alarm clock is violence, and your snooze button doesn't exist. You try to sit up, and your back protests immediately. You are 28 years old, which means you've been a slave for maybe 15 years. And your spine feels like it is held together by spite and scar tissue. The person next to you is still asleep. You don't wake them. They'll figure it out when the overseer arrives with his stick. Solidarity is nice, but survival is nicer. You stand up, and your feet touch the cold, damp floor. It is either wet from condensation, urine, or the blood from yesterday's beating. You don't investigate. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. Let's talk about what you are wearing, or rather, what passes for clothing. If you are lucky, you've got a tunic, a single piece of rough wool cloth that hangs to about mid-thigh. It hasn't been washed in weeks, maybe months. Water is for drinking, and for your master's elaborate bathhouse fantasies, not for slave hygiene. The fabric is scratchy, coarse, and probably hosting a small civilization of lice. If you are unlucky, you've got a loincloth. Just a strip of fabric covering the absolute minimum required by Roman decency laws, which, to be clear, don't really apply to slaves. You are basically one bad day away from full nudity, and that bad day happens more often than you'd think. No shoes. Shoes are for people, and the law is pretty clear that you are technically property. Your feet are calloused, cracked, and permanently stained with dirt, manure, and the general filth of Roman streets. You'll walk on hot paving stones in summer, cold mud in winter, and broken pottery shards year, round by age 30. If you make it that far, your feet will look like they belong to someone who lost a fight with a cheese grater, and lost badly. Now comes breakfast, and by breakfast I mean the stuff that wouldn't qualify as food in any modern context. You are given a small portion of pulse, which is a kind of porridge made from grain, water, and crushing disappointment. It is grey, lumpy, and tastes like absolutely nothing, which is actually better than tasting like something, because when it tastes like something, that something is usually rancid. Sometimes there is a bit of stale bread, hard enough to use as a weapon, dry enough to choke you. You eat it anyway, because the alternative is starving, and Rome doesn't have a workers' compensation program for slaves who die of malnutrition. If you are really lucky, there is some olive oil mixed in. If you are unlucky, there is weevils mixed in. Either way, you eat quickly because the moment you are done, you are expected to work. No coffee, no morning stretch, no checking your phone. Just immediate back-breaking labour that will continue until the sun goes down, and sometimes well after. Your job depends entirely on what your master does and how much they hate you. Household slaves have it relatively better, which is like saying being punched is better than being stabbed. Sure, it is true, but you are still having a bad time. Household slaves clean, cook, fetch water, empty chamber pots, and perform every menial task their owners can't be bothered to do, which is everything. Roman elites didn't lift a finger if they could avoid it. Why would they? That is what slaves are for. You might be a bedroom slave, responsible for dressing your master, doing their hair, holding the mirror while they admire themselves. Sounds easy until you realize that one mistake, one pulled hair, one moment where the mirror angle isn't perfect, and you are getting backhanded across the room. Your master doesn't see you as human. You are furniture that occasionally makes mistakes, and furniture gets replaced. If you are a kitchen slave, your day is fire, smoke, and burns. Roman kitchens were small, hot and incredibly dangerous. You are cooking over an open flame with no safety regulations, no protective equipment, and an expectation of perfection. The food you prepare is elaborate, expensive, and completely off limits to you. You are making roasted peacock, honeyed dormice, and garum, soaked delicacies while your own meal is grey slop. One time, just one time, you sneak a small bite of the food you spent hours preparing. You are caught. The punishment is 20 lashes. You never do it again. But household slaves, for all their misery, aren't the bottom of the hierarchy. That honour belongs to agricultural slaves. If you are working on a latifundium, one of those massive Roman estates, you are essentially living in hell with a better climate. You wake up in chains. Literal chains, because agricultural slaves were considered flight risks. Many were shackled at night. Your ankle is rubbed raw from the iron. It is infected. It has been infected for months. No one cares. You are marched out to the fields in a line, still chained together and given a tool. A hoe, a sickle, a plough. You work the land from sunrise to sunset. Planting, harvesting, digging, hauling. The sun beats down on you with the fury of a god who specifically hates your existence. There is no shade, no breaks, no water, unless the overseer feels generous, and he never feels generous. Your back bends, your hands bleed, your muscles scream. You are 28, but you feel 60. The overseers walk between the rows of slaves, watching for anyone slowing down. They carry whips, not as a threat, as a promise. You see someone collapse 2 rows over. Heat stroke, exhaustion, maybe just the will to live finally snapping. The overseer doesn't call for help. He kicks the body to see if it moves. It doesn't. He makes a note on his tablet and keeps walking. The body will be removed at the end of the day. Maybe, if it is convenient. You keep working. You don't look over. Looking means you are not working, and not working means you are next. Let's talk about the mines, because if agricultural slavery is hell, mine slavery is hell's basement. Roman mines, especially the silver and gold mines in Spain and Egypt, were death sentences with extra steps. You are sent underground into tunnels barely wide enough to crawl through. The air is thick with dust that coats your lungs and never leaves. You are chipping away at rock with primitive tools by the light of oil lamps that produce more smoke than illumination. Cave-ins are common. Poisonous gas is common. Suffocation is common. Escape is impossible because you are underground, chained, and surrounded by guards who would rather kill you than let you run. Life expectancy in the mines is measured in months, not years. Months you go in relatively healthy, and within half a year you are coughing blood, your lungs are shredded, your body is broken, and when you finally collapse, they don't send you to a doctor, they leave you in the tunnel and send in a replacement. The mines are full of bones. Literally. Roman mining operations didn't bother with burials. You died where you fell, and the next shift just worked around your corpse until it stopped smelling. Now let's talk about punishments, because being a slave isn't just about working until you die. It is about living in constant fear of violence for infractions you didn't know were infractions. Roman law gave masters almost unlimited power to punish their slaves. Breaking a plate, beating. Spilling wine, beating. Looking at your master the wrong way, beating. Your master had a bad day at the forum. Congratulations, you are getting beaten for that too. But beatings are the mild option. For serious offences, real or imagined, the punishments got creative. You could be branded with hot iron, marking you permanently as a runaway or a thief. The smell of your own burning flesh is something you'll never forget, assuming you survive. You could be sent to the ergastulum, a private prison on your master's estate, where slaves were kept in underground cells, chained in darkness, and worked until they died. It was legal, common even, no trial, no appeal, just disappearing into a hole in the ground because someone decided you look suspicious. And if you really upset your master, there was crucifixion. Yes, that crucifixion. Romans didn't invent it for religious purposes. They'd been using it for centuries as the go-to execution method for rebellious slaves. Slow, public agonizing. You are nailed or tied to a wooden cross and left to die of exhaustion, dehydration, or asphyxiation over the course of days. It is designed to be humiliating and terrifying. A warning to every other slave within viewing distance. Don't rebel. Don't even think about it. Speaking of running, let's talk about escape. You think about it constantly. Every slave does. The problem is that running away is nearly impossible, and almost always ends badly. First, you are marked. If you are a slave in a Roman household, you might have your hair cut in a distinctive style, or you are wearing a collar, an actual metal collar around your neck with your master's name and address engraved on it. Some collars have messages like, "I have run away, return me to." It is a dog tag, except you are not a dog. You are a human being treated worse than one. If you do manage to run, where do you go? Rome controls most of the known world. There is no underground railroad, no safe houses, no abolitionist movement. If you are caught, and you probably will be, professional slave catchers make a living hunting people like you. The punishment for running is severe: branding, beating, execution, or being sold to the mines, which is execution with extra suffering. Some slaves try anyway. Desperation breeds courage, or maybe just the calculation that dying free is better than living in chains. But here is the thing: not all slaves are treated equally, and that inequality is almost worse than universal suffering because it creates hope. False hope. If you are educated, if you speak Greek, if you have skills like accounting or teaching, you might become a valued household slave. You might live in relative comfort. You might even earn money through tips or side work. You might, if you are incredibly lucky and your master is unusually generous, buy your freedom someday. That possibility, that tiny sliver of maybe, keeps many slaves obedient. Why rebel when you might be freed in 10 years? Why risk everything when you are treated better than the field slaves? It is a brilliant system of control. Give some slaves just enough privilege to make them complicit in their own oppression. Make them grateful for being beaten less than others. Make them hope. But even privileged slaves are still slaves. Even the most trusted, most valued, most educated slave can be raped by their master, with no legal recourse, can be sold on a whim, can be tortured if their master suspects them of anything. Roman law is clear. A slave's testimony is only valid in court if it is given under torture, because obviously, slaves would lie unless you are physically destroying them. That is the logic. If you are accused of something, your testimony requires torture. If you are a witness to something, your testimony requires torture. The law assumes you are inherently dishonest because you are property. Sexual exploitation is constant and unavoidable, especially if you are young or attractive. Male or female doesn't matter. Your body isn't yours, it belongs to your master, and they can use it however they want. Rape is so common, it is not even discussed as rape. It is just a master exercising their property rights. If you resist, you are punished for damaging your master's enjoyment. If you comply, you are left with trauma, possible pregnancy if you are female, and the knowledge that this will happen again and again until you are no longer useful. If a female slave gets pregnant, the child is born a slave, automatically. It doesn't matter who the father is. The baby belongs to the mother's master, which means your children will grow up in the same system that is destroying you. You watch them go through everything you've endured, and there is nothing you can do about it. Some mothers try to protect their children by working harder, being more obedient, hoping their master will be kind. Some masters are, most aren't. Some mothers in desperate moments choose infanticide. It is illegal, but so is mercy, apparently. Life expectancy for Roman slaves is hard to pin down because Romans didn't keep great records of people they considered property. But modern estimates suggest field slaves lived into their 20s or early 30s. Household slaves may be into their 40s if they were very lucky. Mines, you are lucky to see 25. For comparison, free Roman citizens of the same era lived into their 50s or 60s if they avoided disease and war. Being a slave literally cut your life in half, or more. Disease spreads fast in slave quarters. Cramped conditions. No sanitation, no medical care. You get sick, you work through it until you can't. Then you are left to recover, or die on your own. Dysentery fever, infections from untreated wounds. All common, all deadly. No one's calling a doctor for a slave unless that slave is incredibly valuable, and even then, the doctor isn't trying that hard. Roman medicine is barely functional for wealthy citizens. For slaves, it is essentially thoughts and prayers, but the thoughts are hope they don't die, and the prayers are to the gods of property value. You are surrounded by death constantly. The person who sleeps next to you might not wake up. The person working in the next field might collapse and never get up. Bodies are removed, new slaves are brought in, and the system continues. You become numb to it. Not because you don't care, because caring too much will destroy what is left of your sanity. And yet, somehow slaves built resistance. Not the Hollywood version with dramatic speeches and coordinated uprisings, though those happened too. The resistance was smaller, daily. Subtle, working slowly when the overseer wasn't looking. Breaking tools accidentally on purpose. Stealing food. helping another slave avoid punishment. Small acts of defiance that said, quietly, I am still human. The most famous resistance was Spartacus, the gladiator who led a slave revolt that terrified Rome for 2 years. He gathered an army of escaped slaves, won battles against Roman legions, and came close to actually escaping Italy. Close. In the end, he was defeated, killed, and 6,000 of his followers were crucified along the Appian Way. 6,000 crosses lining the road from Rome to Capua. A warning. A message. This is what happens when you resist. But even that didn't stop people from trying, because the alternative was accepting that you'd die in chains, and some part of the human spirit just refuses to accept that, even when acceptance would be easier, even when resistance means certain death. Your day ends the way it started, with exhaustion. You are herded back to the slave quarters as the sun sets. You are given another meal of grey slop. You collapse onto your straw mat. Your body hurts everywhere. Your mind is too tired to process anything. You close your eyes, and tomorrow you'll wake up and do it all again. And the day after that, and the day after that, until you die, or until something changes. For most slaves, nothing changes. They live, they suffer, they die, and Rome doesn't notice. The empire runs on their labor and doesn't bother to remember their names. History records the emperors, the generals, the senators, the people who built the roads, the aqueducts, the monuments that tourists visit today. Forgotten. But here is what is worth remembering: they survived. In a system designed to break them, to dehumanize them, to work them to death, they survived. They found moments of joy. They formed relationships. They told stories. They sang songs. They resisted in small ways and sometimes big ways. They were human beings forced into an inhuman system. And they remained human despite everything Rome did to strip that away. So the next time you see a picture of the Colosseum or read about the glory of Rome, remember that glory was built by people who had no choice. People who suffered so elites could philosophize about virtue. People who died so emperors could throw parties. The marble was beautiful. The cost was incalculable. And that was just one day. One single day in a life that might last 20 or 30 years if you are lucky. Decades of this. Decades of waking up to violence, working until your body breaks, and going to sleep knowing tomorrow will be exactly the same. Rome called it civilization. The people living it might have used a different word. But wait, there is more, because we haven't even talked about the slave market yet. The place where you were bought, where you were sold, where your value was determined by strangers examining your teeth, like you are livestock, which, legally speaking, you are. The slave market is where the fiction of Roman civilization completely drops its mask. This isn't philosophy or law or engineering. This is humans treating other humans like merchandise. And it is completely normal. You are standing on a platform, naked or nearly naked. They've stripped you down because buyers want to see what they're purchasing. They want to check for scars, for deformities, for anything that might lower your value. Your body is on display for dozens of potential buyers, and you are not allowed to cover yourself. Modesty is a luxury. Privacy is a joke. You are property. And property doesn't have dignity. A potential buyer approaches. He is middle-aged, well-fed, wearing a toga that costs more than your entire life. He grabs your arm, squeezes your muscle, checks your teeth, pulls your eyelids back to examine your eyes, asks you to walk, to turn, to bend. You comply because refusing isn't an option. He asks the slave dealer questions. How old are you? Where are you from? What languages do you speak? Can you read? Can you cook? The dealer answers, sometimes truthfully, sometimes not. The buyer doesn't ask you directly. Why would he? You are just the product. If you are young and attractive, the inspection gets worse, more invasive. Buyers checking everything, evaluating you for purposes you don't want to think about. If you are female, this is especially horrifying. If you are male, it is not much better. The slave market doesn't care about your discomfort. It cares about price points and profit margins. Prices vary wildly depending on what you can do. An unskilled laborer, someone who be sent to the fields or the mines, might sell for 500 to 1,500 denarii. That is about 6 months to a year and a half of wages for a regular Roman worker. Not cheap, but not expensive either. You are an investment, like buying a plough. If you break, they'll buy another one. But if you have skills, your price goes up. A literate slave who can do accounting might sell for 5,000 denarii. A skilled cook, 3,000. A beautiful young slave destined for sexual exploitation can go for 10,000 or more. The more specialized the skill, the higher the price. Doctors, teachers, musicians, scribes, all expensive. all trapped in the same system, just with better food and marginally less physical abuse. The highest prices are for highly educated Greek slaves. Romans fetishized Greek culture, while simultaneously enslaving Greeks by the thousands. A Greek philosopher or rhetoric teacher could sell for 20,000 denarii or more. That is 10 years of wages for a skilled worker. You are expensive because you can teach a Roman's children to speak proper Greek and quote Homer. You'll live in comfort, relatively speaking. You'll eat well. You'll have your own room. But you are still a slave, still property, still completely at your master's mercy. Children are sold in the slave market too. Some are born into slavery. Some are abandoned by free parents who couldn't afford to raise them. Some are kidnapped. All of them are terrified. A child might sell for a few hundred denarii, depending on age and potential. Buyers calculate return on investment. How many years of work will they get before the child's body gives out? Can they train the child in a valuable skill? Is the child attractive enough to be groomed for sexual purposes? These are the questions, asked casually, openly, as if they're discussing buying a dog. You are sold. The transaction takes a few minutes. Money changes hands. Paperwork is filled out. You are transferred from one owner to another, like a piece of furniture. The new owner puts a collar on you, or marks you with a brand, or just tells you to follow. You do. What else can you do? This is your life now. At least until you are sold again, because you probably will be. Slaves change hands frequently. Owners die, go bankrupt, get bored, decide they need a different type of slave. You are liquid assets, easily transferred, easily replaced. Let's talk about gladiators, because popular culture loves them. Movies make them look heroic, brave, fighting for glory and freedom. The reality is significantly worse. If you are a gladiator, you are a slave forced to fight other slaves for the entertainment of crowds who view you as slightly more interesting than a particularly aggressive chicken. Training as a gladiator starts in a ludus, a gladiator school that is part prison, part training camp, part death row. You are purchased by a lanista, a gladiator manager who sees you as an investment. He is not training you out of kindness. He is training you to make him money. You sleep in cells. You train for hours every day. The diet is actually decent, high-calorie food designed to build muscle and body mass. But that is not generosity. That is economics. Fat and muscle look good in the arena, and corpses that fall dramatically are better entertainment. The training is brutal. You are learning to kill people efficiently while making it look theatrical. Different types of gladiators have different equipment and fighting styles. Mellow, Thrax, Retiarius, Secutor. These aren't characters in a game, these are forced roles in a lethal performance. You don't get to choose. The lanista decides, based on your body type, and what he thinks will sell tickets. Your first fight is terrifying. You are standing in the arena, the Colosseum or some smaller amphitheater, and the crowd is roaring. They're not roaring for you. They're roaring for blood. Your blood, your opponent's blood. They don't care whose. They just want violence. You are armed, but so is the person trying to kill you. They're also a slave, also trapped, also terrified. But only one of you is leaving this arena alive, or at least leaving without crippling injuries. The fights aren't always to the death. That is a myth. Gladiators are expensive. Killing them every match is bad business. Most fights end when one gladiator is clearly defeated, and then the crowd or the sponsor decides whether they live or die. Thumbs up, you live. Thumbs down. Well, if you are spared, congratulations. You get to recover from your injuries and do it all again in a few weeks. If you are not spared, you die in the sand while the crowd cheers and moves on to the next fight. Even if you survive, the injuries accumulate. Broken bones, gashes, internal damage, scars layered on scars. Gladiators often died young, not from fights, but from infections, from injuries that never healed properly, from bodies that just gave up. There is a graveyard in Ephesus full of gladiator bones. Modern analysis shows most died in their 20s. The ones who lived to 30 were considered ancient. Some gladiators won enough fights to earn their freedom. They were given a rudis, a wooden sword symbolizing release from service. But freedom after being a gladiator is complicated. You are free, but you are traumatized, injured, and the only skilling people in front of crowds. Many freed gladiators became trainers, stayed in the system, because what else could they do? They'd spent their entire adult lives in cells and arenas. The outside world was foreign territory. And then there are the speciality slaves, the ones with jobs so specific, so strange, that they highlight just how much Roman society depended on enslaved labor for literally everything. You might be a nomenclator, A slave whose only job is to memorize the names and faces of everyone your master might meet, and whisper those names so your master doesn't look foolish. Your entire existence is being a human database, and if you get a name wrong, you are beaten for embarrassing your master. You might be a pedosequus, a slave who follows your master around in public carrying things. Not because the things are heavy, because carrying your own stuff is beneath the Roman elite. You are there to make your master look important. You are a prop, a living accessory. You might work in a bathhouse, one of those elaborate public baths that Romans loved so much. Sounds pleasant until you realize your job is scraping dead skin and oil off naked Romans with a curved metal tool called a strigil, for hours, every day. Or you are the one maintaining the furnace that heats the water, working in unbearable heat, shoveling coal or wood, breathing smoke, never seeing daylight. Bathhouse slaves were essential to Roman leisure, and absolutely no one thought about how miserable their lives were. Public slaves exist too, slaves owned by the state rather than private individuals. You might maintain roads, clean temples, work in public buildings. In theory, being a public slave is better because you are not at the mercy of one person's whims. In practice, you are at the mercy of whatever official is currently in charge, and they change frequently. Each new official has new ideas about how hard you should work, how little you should eat, how strictly you should be supervised. Consistency is impossible. Stability is a fantasy. Imperial slaves, owned by the emperor, occupy a strange position in the hierarchy. Some have significant power. They manage imperial properties, handle finances, run administrative offices. A slave running an imperial office might have more practical authority than free citizens working under him. But that power is conditional, temporary, and can be revoked instantly. You might be managing millions of denarii one day and crucified the next because you displeased someone in the imperial household. The higher you climb in the imperial system, the more dangerous your position becomes. Let's talk about family, or rather, the absence of it. As a slave, you don't have legal family. You can't legally marry. You can't have children that belong to you. Roman law doesn't recognize slave relationships as legitimate, but slaves form relationships anyway, because humans need connection to survive. You fall in love. You find someone who understands the nightmare you are living. You build something together in the cracks of the system, but that relationship has no protection. Your master can sell you at any time, can sell your partner, can sell your children. Families are separated constantly, casually, without thought. A master dies and their slaves are divided among heirs like furniture. You are sent to one household, your partner to another, your children to a third. You never see them again. There is no appeals process, no way to fight it. They're just gone. Some masters allow slave relationships. Some even encourage them because slaves with families are less likely to run away. It is not kindness. It is leverage. Your family becomes a chain holding you in place. Run, and your family suffers. Rebel, and your children pay the price. The system uses love as a weapon against you. If you have children, they're born slaves. Your son or daughter inherits your chains. You watch them grow up knowing they'll face everything you faced. You can't protect them. You can't change their fate. All you can do is teach them how to survive, how to avoid beatings, how to endure. It is the most hopeless kind of parenting imaginable. You are raising children for a life of suffering, and there is nothing you can do to change it. Some slave mothers kill their newborns rather than let them live in slavery. It is illegal. It is punished severely. But when the choice is between a quick death and decades of torment, some mothers choose death. It is a mercy they tell themselves, a final act of love, the only choice they have left. Seasonal work brings its own horrors. Harvest season, whether grain, grapes, or olives, means longer hours, more intense labor, less rest. You are already working sunrise to sunset. During harvest, you work beyond sunset by torchlight. You work until you physically collapse, because the crop has to come in, and your exhaustion is irrelevant. Sleep 4 hours, wake up, do it again. Winter is different, but no less awful. Agricultural slaves have less work, but that doesn't mean rest. You are put to other tasks, repairing equipment, building structures, clearing land, and the cold is relentless. You are still sleeping in the same poorly insulated quarters, still wearing the same thin tunic. Rome doesn't issue winter uniforms to slaves. You freeze at night and work through the cold during the day. Your fingers go numb, your joints ache. The cold seeps into your bones and stays there. Illness in winter spreads fast. Cramped quarters, poor nutrition, weakened immune systems. Respiratory infections killed slaves by the dozens. Pneumonia was common, fatal, and entirely preventable with basic medical care and decent living conditions. But prevention costs money, and slaves are cheap enough to replace. The economic calculation is brutal and simple. It is cheaper to let slaves die and buy new ones than to keep them healthy. Religious life for slaves is complicated. Officially, you are allowed to worship. Some masters even encourage it because religion keeps slaves docile. Pray to the gods, accept your fate. Hope for better treatment in the next life. It is excellent propaganda. But your religious participation is controlled. You attend festivals when your master allows it. You worship in ways your master approves. Your spirituality, like everything else, belongs to someone else. Some slaves find genuine comfort in religion. The mystery cults, like the cult of Isis or Mithras, attract slaves because they promise equality in the eyes of the divine. In the temple, a slave and a free person are both supplicants. It is not much, but it is something. A few hours where the hierarchy doesn't apply, where you are seen as human, as worthy, as spiritually equal. Christianity, in its early years, spreads among slaves for similar reasons. The promise that the last shall be first, that the suffering will be rewarded, that earthly masters have no power in heaven. It is appealing when your earthly life is unrelenting misery. Of course, once Christianity becomes the official religion of Rome, it conveniently forgets to abolish slavery. The church even owns slaves. Turns out revolutionary movements become less revolutionary when they gain power. Death, when it comes, is unceremonious. If you die working, your body is removed and disposed of quickly. Burial practices for slaves are minimal. No elaborate tombstones, no fancy ceremonies. You might be buried in a mass grave with other slaves. You might be cremated cheaply. You might just be thrown into a pit outside the city. There are slave cemeteries, but they're unmarked, forgotten. Archaeologists occasionally find them, full of bones with evidence of hard labor, injuries, and short lives. A few slaves, the valued ones, get proper burials. Their masters might erect a small tombstone acknowledging their service. These are rare, but they exist. Inscriptions like "To Marcus, faithful slave who served well. Even in death you are defined by your service." Your identity is what you did for someone else, not who you were. The tombstone is more about the master's generosity than the slave's life. Freedmen occupy a strange middle ground in Roman society. If you are freed, you become a libertus, a freedman. You are no longer a slave, but you are not fully free either. You have obligations to your former master. You owe them respect, labor, even money. You are legally free but socially and economically tied to your past. Your children, if you have them after manumission, are born free, but you carry the stain of slavery forever. Roman society never lets you forget what you were. Manumission, the process of being freed, happens in several ways. Your master might free you in their will. Sounds generous until you realize you had to wait for them to die. And many masters changed their wills multiple times, dangling freedom as a carrot, to keep you obedient. You might buy your freedom if you've managed to save money over years, decades even. The price is usually equivalent to your market value. You are buying yourself from someone who shouldn't own you in the first place. Some masters free slaves as a public display of generosity. Look how kind I am freeing loyal servants. It is theatre, a performance for other elites. The freed slaves are props in someone else's story of virtue. And even after being freed, many continue working for their former masters because what else can they do? Where else can they go? Freedom, without resources, is barely freedom at all. The most successful freedmen become wealthy, powerful even. They go into business, accumulate fortunes, buy slaves of their own. It is the ultimate irony. Former slaves becoming slave owners. The system corrupts even those who suffered under it. Because in Rome, owning people is status. It is normalcy. Breaking the cycle requires imagining a world Romans couldn't conceive of. Let's talk about language and names. Your name as a slave is often chosen by your master. It might reflect where you are from. Cyrus for someone from Syria, Gaius for Gaul. It might be a Greek name if your master wants to sound cultured. Or it might just be a number, Primus, Secundus, Tertius. First, second, third. You are not a person. You are inventory. If you had a name before slavery, it is erased. Your identity from your free life is stripped away. You are renamed, rebranded, made into whatever your master wants you to be. Lose your name, lose your past, lose yourself. It is psychological destruction by design. If you don't remember who you were, you can't imagine who you could be. Speaking languages becomes survival. If you are enslaved from a foreign land, you need to learn Latin fast. No one's teaching you gently. You pick it up through beatings, through trial and error, through desperate need to understand orders. Fail to understand, fail to comply, get punished. It is immersive language learning at its most brutal. But bilingual slaves are valuable. If you speak Greek and Latin, you are worth more. If you speak Aramaic, Coptic, Punic, any language Rome needs for trade or administration, you are an asset. Language becomes leverage, a way to make yourself harder to replace. It doesn't make you free, but it might make your slavery less horrific. Might get you out of the fields and into a household. Might save your life. Now let's talk about education, specifically the education of slave children. Some slave children are trained in specific skills from a young age. If you are born into a household of wealthy Romans, you might be trained alongside free children, not as an equal, never as an equal, but you are learning to read, to write, to do mathematics. Why? Because literate slaves are useful. They can keep records, handle correspondence, manage accounts. This creates a bizarre dynamic where you, a slave child, might be more educated than free Roman poor. But your education doesn't liberate you. It just makes you a more expensive piece of property. You are taught enough to be useful, never enough to be dangerous. Critical thinking is discouraged. Questions are punished. Your job is to apply skills, not to think independently. Some slave children become pedagogues, essentially enslaved tutors for free children. You walk the master's son to school, carry his books, help him with lessons. You might be more educated than the child you were serving. You understand the material better, grasp concepts faster. But you are still the slave, and he is still free. He'll grow up to own people. You'll grow up to be owned. Education doesn't change that fundamental reality. Aging as a slave is watching your value decrease in real time. When you are young and strong, you are worth something. As you age, as your body breaks down from decades of labor, you become a liability. Masters calculate whether feeding you costs more than your remaining productive years are worth. It is cold economics applied to human life. Old slaves, those who somehow survive to their 40s or 50s, are often given lighter work. Not out of respect, out of pragmatism. You can't work the fields anymore, so you are assigned tasks that don't require physical strength. Watching children, basic cleaning, simple crafts. You are kept alive as long as you are even marginally useful. But if you become completely unable to work, your options narrow dramatically. Some masters support elderly slaves out of a sense of obligation or reputation. Look how I care for my slaves even when they're useless. It is performative virtue. Other masters simply abandon old slaves, throw them out to beg or die on the streets. It is legal. Slaves are property, and property rights include the right to dispose of property that no longer serves its purpose. There are documented cases of old slaves being left at temples, essentially dumped there in hopes that priests will take them in. Some temples do, some don't. Either way, you've spent your entire life serving someone, and your reward is dying alone among strangers. Disability complicates everything. If you are injured at work, whether you are kept alive depends on the injury, and your value minor injuries. You work through them. A broken finger, a sprained ankle, bruised ribs. You don't get time off. You get threats if you slow down. More serious injuries, you might get basic care. Setting bones, bandaging wounds, nothing sophisticated. The goal isn't your health. It is preserving enough function to keep you working. Lose a limb, lose your sight, become paralyzed. You are likely dead. Not immediately. But you are no longer economically viable. A one-armed slave can't do heavy labor. A blind slave can't perform most tasks. Masters might keep you on for simple work, might sell you cheap to someone who needs minimal labor, or might just leave you to die. Disability as a slave means your already precarious existence becomes even more fragile. There are exceptions. A highly skilled slave who loses physical ability might transition to supervisory work. You can't swing a hammer anymore, but you can tell other slaves how to do it. You are valuable for your knowledge, not your body, but these cases are rare. Most disabled slaves simply disappear from the record. No one tracked what happened to them, because no one cared. Let's circle back to the psychological toll of all this. You are living in a constant state of hypervigilance. Every action is monitored. Every word is judged. You can't relax, ever, because relaxing means letting your guard down, and letting your guard down means punishment. Your nervous system is in permanent fight or flight mode, except flight isn't an option, so it is just fight or freeze, and freezing gets you beaten. The trauma compounds over time: years of beatings, humiliation, sexual abuse, watching friends die, losing family. You develop what modern psychology would recognize as complex PTSD. But Rome doesn't have psychiatry. They have no concept of mental health care. You are expected to function regardless of psychological damage. Your master doesn't care if you are traumatized. Work anyway. Obey anyway. Survive anyway. Some slaves break psychologically. Stop eating, stop responding, retreat into themselves. Romans didn't have a term for severe depression or dissociation. They just saw slaves who stopped working and punished them for laziness, which made it worse, which caused more deterioration. It is a death spiral with no intervention, no help, no recognition that the system itself is destroying human minds. Others adapt by becoming numb. You shut down emotionally, stop forming attachments, stop hoping, stop feeling much of anything. It is protective dissociation. If you don't feel, you can't be hurt as deeply. But it is a hollow existence. You are alive, but only technically. You are going through motions, surviving, not living. And yet, impossibly, some slaves maintain their humanity. They love, they laugh. They find moments of joy in a joyless system. They're not broken. They're resilient in ways that are almost incomprehensible. How do you maintain hope when there is no rational reason for hope? How do you love when love brings pain? How do you keep going when every day is suffering? There is no good answer. People just did. Because the alternative was giving up, and giving up meant the system won completely. And some part of the human spirit refuses to let the system win, even when winning is impossible. The Roman economy runs on slavery so completely that imagining Rome without slaves is like imagining a body without a circulatory system. Every industry, every service, every level of society depends on enslaved labor. Agriculture is almost entirely slave, staffed, manufacturing, mining, construction. All slaves, domestic work obviously, but also skilled trades, blacksmiths, bakers, artisans, craftspeople. Many are slaves. This creates an economic incentive to maintain slavery that goes beyond individual cruelty. The entire system is built on it. Abolishing slavery would crash the economy. Free labor couldn't compete with enslaved labor because enslaved labor costs nothing beyond purchase price and basic sustenance. It is the ultimate race to the bottom. Why pay workers when you can own them? This economic structure means even relatively poor free Romans benefit from slavery. They're not competing with slaves for jobs because they'd lose. Slaves undercut wages to zero. But this makes free Romans dependent on the system too. Their slightly better status depends on someone else being at the very bottom. It is a hierarchy, maintained through mutual exploitation and fear of falling down a rung. Warfare feeds the system constantly. Every Roman military campaign produces slaves. Prisoners of war become property. Entire cities conquered and enslaved. The Gallic Wars alone brought over 1 million slaves into Roman territory. That is not an exaggeration. Julius Caesar's campaigns in Gaul enslaved populations on an industrial scale. War wasn't just about territory. It was about capturing labor. This means Rome has an economic incentive for constant warfare. Slave populations need replenishing because slaves die faster than they reproduce. The system literally cannot sustain itself without constant influx of new enslaved people. Peace threatens the economy. War feeds it. It is an incentive structure that guarantees violence and suffering as long as the system exists. Piracy also supplies slaves. Mediterranean pirates capture ships, sell passengers and crew into slavery. Coastal raids snatch people from their homes. It is profitable, common, and only suppressed when it interferes with Roman shipping. Rome eventually cracks down on piracy, not to save potential slaves, but to protect Roman commercial interests. The moral question never enters the equation. Debt slavery exists too. Free people who fall into debt can be enslaved until the debt is paid. In theory, this is temporary. In practice, the debt often increases faster than you can pay it off. Interest compounds, new fees appear, and temporary slavery becomes permanent. It is a trap, legal and common. You start free, make one financial mistake, and end up in chains. Child abandonment feeds the system. Poor families who can't afford another mouth to feed leave babies in public places. Sometimes someone picks them up and raises them. More often, someone picks them up and enslaves them. It is legal. Abandoned children are considered free property. The baby left on the temple steps becomes a slave by morning. The family might not even know, might assume the child died, might prefer not to know. This creates horrifying incentives. Some people abandon children specifically hoping someone will take them as slaves because at least then the child eats. Slavery is the lesser evil. That is where Rome has brought society, to a place where enslaving your own child seems like mercy. Kidnapping is rampant. Children playing outside disappear. Adults travelling alone vanish. Professional kidnappers operate with relative impunity, because proving someone was kidnapped versus bought legally is nearly impossible. By the time a family realizes someone is missing, the victim is sold, collared, and lost in the system. Searching is futile. The market moves fast, and there are no centralized records. Some kidnapping victims are free Roman citizens. That is illegal. Rome has laws against enslaving citizens, but enforcement is minimal, and if you are taken far enough from home, who is to say you were ever free? Your claims are dismissed. You have no proof. Your accent marks you as foreign. Your desperation makes you look suspicious. You insist you are a citizen, and you are beaten for lying. Eventually, you stop insisting. What is the point? Now let's talk about revolts in more detail, because Spartacus wasn't alone. He was just the most famous. Slave revolts pepper Roman history. First Servile War, Second Servile War, and Spartacus's Third Servile War, each one massive, bloody, and ultimately crushed. The First Servile War in Sicily, 135 to 132 BCE, involved tens of thousands of slaves who'd had enough. They took cities, defeated Roman armies, established their own government. For 3 years, enslaved people controlled part of Sicily. They proved slaves could organize, could fight, could govern. Rome eventually sent enough military force to crush them, that the message was clear: slaves were dangerous when pushed too far. The Second Servile War, also in Sicily, 104 to 100 BCE, similar story. Slaves rebelled, fought for years, lost eventually. The pattern repeats because the conditions that cause revolts never change. Rome responds to uprisings with overwhelming violence, but never thinks to address why people keep rebelling. Why would they? From Rome's perspective, the system works. For them, after each revolt, punishments are spectacular: mass crucifixions, wholesale slaughter, survivors sold to the worst possible conditions. The message is clear and brutal: rebel and die horribly. But the message doesn't work, because when your life is already horrible, the threat of horrible death loses its deterrent power. You are dying slowly anyway, might as well die fighting. Between large revolts, small rebellions happen constantly. A few slaves kill an overseer and run. A household slave poisons their master. A group tries to escape together. Most fail. Most are caught and executed. But they keep trying because the alternative is accepting endless suffering. And humans are bad at accepting that. Roman law responds to this fear with preventive brutality. If a master is murdered, all slaves in the household are executed. All of them. Doesn't matter if you were involved. Doesn't matter if you were in a different part of the house. Doesn't matter if you tried to stop it. You are killed as a deterrent. The law is clear. Slaves must police each other, or everyone dies. This creates impossible moral dilemmas. If you know another slave is planning to kill your master, do you report them? Reporting means that slave dies. Not reporting means you might die if they succeed. There is no good choice. The system is designed to destroy solidarity, to make slaves into accomplices in their own oppression. There is a famous case where a Roman senator, Lucius Pedanius Secundus, was killed by one of his slaves. Roman law demanded all 400 slaves in his household be executed. 400 people. The Senate debated this. Some senators argued it was excessive. Maybe just execute the ones who could have stopped it. Others argued no. The law is the law. Execute everyone. They executed everyone. 400 crucifixions because one person killed their master. The crowd protested. Free Romans thought it was too cruel. Rome did it anyway. Can't let slaves think they can get away with murder, even when the master was brutal enough to provoke it. Work life for urban slaves differs from rural, but it is not better. If you are a slave in Rome itself, you are navigating a crowded, dirty, dangerous city. You are sent on errands through streets filled with people, animals, waste, and constant noise. Getting from one place to another is an ordeal. You are carrying heavy loads, navigating crowds, trying not to get robbed or assaulted. Your master doesn't care about the difficulty. The task must be done, and how hard it is for you is irrelevant. You might work in a shop and workshop, a business owned by your master. You are doing all the actual work while your master takes all the profit. You might be skilled, talented, excellent at your craft. Doesn't matter. The money goes to your owner. You are creating value you'll never benefit from. It is economic exploitation formalized into law. Some urban slaves are rented out. Your master loans you to someone else for a fee. You work for this other person doing whatever they need, and your master collects payment. You see none of it. You are being prostituted. Economically speaking. Your labor, your time, your body, all monetized for someone else's gain. It is an extra layer of dehumanization. You are not even worth keeping busy. You are worth renting out like equipment. This rental system applies to sexual slavery too. Brothel slaves are owned by pimps who rent their bodies to customers. The slave sees none of the money, experiences all of the trauma. And it is legal, common. Brothels are everywhere in Rome. Prostitution is accepted, normalized, taxed. The government profits from the systematic sexual exploitation of enslaved people and sees no issue with this. Female slaves in brothels live in tiny cells, often underground, with just enough room for a bed. The walls are covered in graffiti, scratched messages from previous occupants. Names, pleas, prayers. Archaeological evidence from Pompeii shows these cells existed exactly as described in texts. They're real. The nightmare is documented in stone. Life expectancy for brothel slaves is even lower than field slaves. Disease, violence, suicide, murder. Brothel work destroys people fast, and when they're used up, they're discarded. No retirement plan. No care for former workers. You are thrown out, sick and broken, to die in the streets. Or you die in the brothel, and you are replaced by mourning. Male slaves face sexual exploitation too. Pederasty is culturally accepted in Rome, following Greek traditions. Young male slaves are targeted by masters' friends, by anyone with access. They have no ability to refuse. Consent is not a concept applied to slaves. If you are attractive and young, you are going to be abused. It is assumed, expected, normalized. This abuse carries into adulthood. Adult male slaves are raped by masters, overseers, anyone with power over them. It is not discussed openly because Roman culture views being penetrated as shameful. But it happens constantly. The silence around it makes it worse. There is no acknowledgement, no support, no recognition of harm. You are supposed to endure it without comment. Entertainment slavery extends beyond gladiators, actors, musicians, dancers. Many are slaves forced to perform. You are trained in whatever talent your master thinks will earn money, then displayed in theatres, at parties, at public events. You are entertainment. Your skill is impressive, but you are not credited for it. Your master receives the praise. You receive nothing. Some performing slaves become famous. Their talents are renowned across Rome. But fame doesn't grant freedom. You are a famous slave, which is still a slave. Your celebrity makes you more valuable, which makes you more tightly controlled. Your master isn't letting their investment walk away, just because everyone knows your name. Child performers have it especially bad. Trained from infancy, never knowing anything but performance and slavery. You are cute now, valuable now. But children grow up. Adult performers are less novel. When you hit adolescence, your value drops unless you have serious talent. Many child performers end up doing menial labor by their teens. The early years of being showcased and praised make the fall even more brutal. Mines deserve more detail because they're truly hell on earth. Different kinds of mines, different specific horrors. Gold mines in Spain, silver mines in Lorient, salt mines, stone quarries. All of them deadly. Stone quarries might be the worst. You are chipping away at rock faces, extracting marble and granite for Roman monuments. The dust is unbelievable. It fills your lungs with every breath. Silicosis, the lung disease caused by inhaling stone dust, is common and fatal. You are coughing constantly, bringing up grey phlegm, feeling your lungs harden and fail. There is no treatment. You work until you die, and you die choking. The noise is deafening. Hundreds of slaves hammering stone creates a sound that never stops. Your hearing goes. Tinnitus is constant. The ringing in your ears becomes the soundtrack of your life. Combined with the dust and the physical labor, it is sensory assault from all directions. Salt mines have different problems. Salt is corrosive. It gets into every wound, every cut, every crack in your skin. It burns, constantly. Your hands are raw, your feet are raw. The salt water you are standing in all day eats away at your flesh. Infections are inevitable, and when you are working in a salt mine, you are often deep underground, in heat and humidity, with minimal air circulation. It is like being slowly marinated in your own misery. The logistics of mining slavery are grimly efficient. Mines are usually far from cities in remote areas. This makes escape even harder. Where would you run to? You are in the middle of nowhere, chained, marked as a slave. Probably don't speak the local language. The wilderness itself is a prison. Even if you escape the mine, you are likely to die of exposure, starvation, or be recaptured by locals who return you for a reward. Guards at mines are brutal. They have one job: maximize productivity and prevent escapes. They're not concerned with slave welfare. Beatings are casual. Killings are shrugged off. A slave dies. There is a whole legal process for a master to get compensation from whoever caused the death. But in a mine far from oversight, those rules are ignored. You die, you are replaced. Simple as that. Some mines use children. Small bodies can fit into tighter spaces, can extract ore from areas adults can't reach. Child mine slaves don't live long. The combination of malnutrition, overwork, and inhaling toxic dust kills them within a year or two. But from an economic standpoint, they're useful for that year. That is the calculation. Not, is this morally wrong? Is this profitable? Transportation of slaves, getting them from point of purchase to point of work, is its own nightmare. Slave caravans march across long distances. You are chained to other slaves walking for weeks. You are given minimal food and water. You sleep outside or in temporary camps. If you get sick or injured during transport, you are left behind. The caravan doesn't wait. They have a schedule to keep and dozens of other slaves to deliver. Sea transport is worse. Slaves are shipped across the Mediterranean in cargo holds, packed tightly, minimal ventilation. Seasickness is universal. You are vomiting, dehydrated, surrounded by others doing the same. The smell is indescribable. The holds are dark, airless, sweltering. Storms are terrifying. If the ship sinks, you are chained below deck, you drown. Happens regularly. Ships carrying slaves go down, and hundreds of people die in the dark, chained, unable to escape. Pirates sometimes capture slave ships. You are a slave on a ship when pirates attack. Your master might die. The pirates kill the crew, take the slaves, sell them in a different market. You are sold again to someone else, in a different place, with no way to ever find your way home. Your life just got shuffled to a new nightmare. Same system. Different location. Weather affects everything. Summer heat is unbearable, especially for agricultural slaves. You are working in fields with no shade, temperatures soaring, water scarce. Heatstroke kills dozens during harvest season. Your body literally can't cool itself. You are sweating out more water than you are taking in. Your brain starts to malfunction. You get dizzy, confused, collapse. If you are unlucky, you die. If you are lucky, you regain consciousness and have to keep working. Winter is cold, and you are not dressed for it. That thin tunic is all you have. No cloak, no extra layers. You are shivering through the night trying to sleep while your body heat drains away. Frostbite is common for slaves working outside in winter. Your fingers, toes, ears, tissue dies. Sometimes it heals. Sometimes it doesn't. Lose fingers, lose toes. You are now a less functional slave, with an even harder life. Rain means mud. Fields become bogs. You are walking through ankle, deep mud, trying to work, slipping, falling. Everything is wet. Your tunic is soaked. There is nowhere to dry off. You sleep in wet clothes, wake up in wet clothes, work in wet clothes. The cold and dampness seep into your bones. Respiratory infections spread. Coughing fits keep you and everyone in the slave quarters awake. But you work anyway. Rain isn't an excuse to stop. Storms are dangerous. If you are working outside during a thunderstorm, you might be struck by lightning, might be hit by falling branches, might just be soaked and freezing. Your master doesn't care. Work continues. Lightning strikes kill a slave every so often. It is acknowledged as an unfortunate loss of property. The slave's experience of being electrocuted and dying in agony isn't part of the discussion. The drought means disaster. Crops fail, which means less food for everyone. But slaves eat last. You are already on minimal rations. During drought, those rations shrink further. You are starving, weak, but still expected to work full days. Your body starts consuming itself. You lose weight you don't have to lose. Muscles waste away. Your body becomes skeletal. And you still work because not working means punishment. And you don't have the energy to survive punishment. Plagues hit hardest in crowded, unsanitary conditions. Slave quarters are ideal disease vectors. When sickness spreads through the slave population, it is devastating. No quarantine, no isolation, no treatment. You are sick. You are with everyone else. Everyone gets sick. Masters respond by trying to preserve their property. Mild attempts at care, but mostly just calculation of losses. Some masters cut their losses, kill all the slaves in an infected group to prevent spread to the rest. It is cheaper than treatment and reduces risk to valuable slaves in other parts of the estate. You are sick, and the solution is mass execution. You die not from disease but from economic decision making. So here you are, enslaved, worked to exhaustion, beaten regularly, sexually exploited, stripped of identity, separated from family, denied medical care, given minimal food, housed in squalor, and constantly under threat of being sold to worse conditions, or just killed. This is your entire life. From the moment you are enslaved until the moment you die, which probably comes soon. Decades if you are very lucky, more likely years. In the mines, months. And the worst part, Rome doesn't think this is wrong. This is just how society works. Slavery is normal, accepted, legal, economically necessary, morally unchallenged. The philosophers discuss virtue and justice while owning people. The poets write about love and beauty while slaves serve them meals. The architects design magnificent buildings that slaves construct with their bodies and lives. Rome's glory is built on an ocean of suffering so vast, so normalized, that most Romans genuinely don't see the problem. You, the slave, see the problem. You live the problem. You are crushed by the problem. But your perspective doesn't matter. You are not considered capable of understanding your own life. Your master knows better. The law knows better. Society knows better. Your suffering is dismissed, justified, or simply ignored. You are told to accept your place. Told it is fate. Told the gods ordained this. Told that some people are natural slaves, meant to serve. It is gaslighting on a civilization-wide scale. But you know the truth. You are not a natural slave. You are a person who was enslaved. There is a difference. You remember freedom, or you've heard stories of it, or you imagine it. You know this isn't right. You know you are human. The system tries to convince you otherwise, and sometimes it succeeds. Sometimes you internalize the lies, believe you are less than, accept that this is all you deserve. But other times, you remember, you resist, even if only in your own mind. You survive with dignity, even when dignity is stripped away daily. You remain human in an inhuman system. And that, ultimately, is what Rome couldn't destroy. The system could break bodies, could shatter lives, could cause unimaginable suffering. But it couldn't fully destroy the humanity of the people it enslaved. That humanity persisted. In small acts of kindness between slaves. In resistance, subtle and overt. In the preservation of identity and culture against systematic erasure. In the sheer stubborn refusal to become the thing Rome said you were. Rome fell eventually, the empire collapsed. The system that seemed eternal proved finite. And when historians look back, when archaeologists dig up the remains, when we study the texts and artifacts, we see the slaves. Not as much as we should. The record is biased toward the powerful, but we see them. In inscriptions, in graffiti, in the physical evidence of their labor, they existed, they mattered, they were human. This is what it meant to be a Roman slave. Not the sanitized version in movies, not the noble servant in period dramas. The actual historical reality, brutal, dehumanizing, deadly and heartbreaking in its sheer scale and duration. Millions of people over centuries, all ground down by a system that saw them as tools. All suffering so Rome could prosper. All forgotten by the civilization they built. But not forgotten entirely. We remember. We have to remember. Because pretending it wasn't that bad. Romanticizing it, or just ignoring it, does a disservice to everyone who lived through it. They deserve to be remembered accurately, in all the horror, in all the injustice, in all the unnecessary suffering that defined their lives. So the next time you see a Roman aqueduct, appreciate the engineering. But remember who built it. When you read about Roman law, acknowledge its influence. But remember what it legalized. When you study Roman culture, learn from it. But remember what it was built on. Remember the slaves. Remember their names when you can find them. Remember their humanity always. And maybe, Just maybe, use that memory to recognize similar patterns in the present. Systems that dehumanize, structures that exploit, hierarchies that crush people at the bottom to elevate those at the top. Rome is gone, but the logic that enabled Roman slavery persists in different forms. Recognizing that is how we honor the people who suffered, by refusing to let it happen again, by building something better, by remembering that every person is human, regardless of what any system claims. But we're not done yet, because there are aspects of slave life we haven't fully explored. The daily humiliations that don't leave physical scars but carve away at your sense of self until there is almost nothing left. The tiny degradations that Romans considered so normal they barely warranted mention in their writings, which makes them all the more insidious. You can't make eye contact with free people. That is not written law everywhere, but it is understood. A slave looking directly at a citizen is seen as insolent, threatening, forgetting their place. So you learn to keep your eyes down, always down. You navigate the world by looking at feet, at the ground, at nothing. You stop seeing faces. You are trained to literally lower your gaze because looking up implies equality. And equality is a fiction you are not allowed to entertain. This rewires how you move through space. You become hunched, smaller, trying to take up less room. You step aside for everyone. You make yourself invisible. It is a survival mechanism. But it is also psychological destruction. You are physically manifesting your own erasure. Your body learns that you don't matter, and eventually part of your mind believes it too. You can't speak unless spoken to, at least in formal settings. Your voice is conditional. You answer when questioned. You obey when ordered. But initiating conversation with your betters, that is presumptuous. So you learn silence. Not the comfortable silence of someone at peace, but the tense silence of someone always waiting for permission to exist. This silence extends to expressing pain. You are hurt. You are sick. You are exhausted. But complaining is insubordination. Showing weakness invites punishment. So you learn to suffer quietly, to hide injuries, to work through pain without acknowledging it. The stoicism that Romans praised in their soldiers and citizens was forced on slaves through brutality. You are not brave. You are terrified of what happens if you show weakness. Personal space doesn't exist for you. Free Romans can touch you whenever they want, however they want. A pat on the head like you are a pet. A shove when you are too slow, grabbing your face to inspect you, pinching, poking, prodding. Your body is public property. You can't pull away, can't flinch, can't show discomfort. Every unwanted touch is a reminder that you don't own yourself. This constant physical violation has lasting effects. You stop having boundaries because boundaries aren't allowed. The concept of bodily autonomy becomes foreign. When every part of you can be accessed by anyone with authority over you, you dissociate from your own flesh. Your body becomes a thing that happens to you, not a thing that is you. Mealtimes are exercises in hierarchical theatre. You serve food to masters and guests. You stand in the corner while they eat, ready to fetch more wine, to clear plates, to attend to every need. The smell of roasted meat, fresh bread, honeyed fruit, all of it in front of you, all of it forbidden. You'll eat later, after everyone else is done, after the food is cold, after you've scraped the good parts onto their plates and kept the scraps for yourself. Some masters make slaves watch them eat elaborate meals as a power display. Look what I have. Look what you can never have. It is not about hunger. It is about maintaining hierarchy through constant reminder of difference. They eat peacock. You eat mush. They recline on couches. You stand until your feet throb. They laugh and enjoy leisure. You wait in tense readiness for the next command. It is a performance of inequality, staged 3 times a day, every day. Bathing is another arena of humiliation. Masters bathe in elaborate bathhouses with hot water, cold plunges, massage rooms, social spaces. You, if you bathe at all, use cold water in whatever crude facility is available. More often, you don't bathe properly for weeks. Months, the dirt accumulates. The smell becomes part of you, and free Romans wrinkle their noses at you, disgusted by the filth they created by denying you access to basic hygiene. If you are a body slave, you are in the bathhouse with your master, attending them. You are scrubbing their back, oiling their skin, attending to their grooming while your own body goes unwashed. The juxtaposition is intentional. They're clean. You are dirty. They're worthy of care. You are not. The message is delivered without words, through action and omission. Sleep deprivation is standard. You wake before your master, go to bed after. If they have a late dinner party, You are working past midnight, cleaning up, attending to drunk guests. Then you are woken at dawn to start the next day. 4 hours of sleep if you are lucky, 3 hours often, 2 hours some nights. This continues for years. Your brain is permanently fogged, your reaction time slows, your emotional regulation deteriorates. But that is fine. Slaves don't need to be well rested, they just need to work. The chronic sleep deprivation has cumulative effects. Memory problems, difficulty concentrating, increased susceptibility to illness, emotional instability. But these are interpreted as character flaws. You are forgetful because slaves are stupid. You are sick because slaves are weak. You are emotional because slaves lack self-control. The system creates conditions that damage you, then blames you for being damaged. You are renamed casually often. If you are sold, your new owner might not like your name. Too complicated, too foreign, too associated with your previous identity. So they change it. You are Aeolus now, or Felix, or whatever name they find amusing. Your name, the last piece of identity you had, is taken and replaced on a whim. You might have 5 different names in your lifetime, none of them chosen by you, all of them temporary. This constant renaming is disorienting. Who are you when your name keeps changing? How do you maintain a sense of self when even your designation is someone else's choice? Some slaves cling to their original name secretly, repeating it to themselves at night, keeping it alive in whispers. Others forget. The name they were born with fades, replaced by whatever their current owner prefers. It is psychological colonization. They don't just own your body, they own how you are called. They own how you think of yourself. Giving becomes perverse. Sometimes during festivals or special occasions, masters give small gifts to slaves. A better meal, a piece of clothing, a coin. Romans saw this as generosity. Look how kind I am to my slaves. But you are not receiving a gift. You are receiving a tiny portion of what was stolen from you. Your labor creates wealth. Your master takes all of it. Then they give you a fraction back and expect gratitude. And you do feel grateful sometimes because the deprivation is so complete that any small mercy feels significant. You've been starved of basic dignity for so long that a full meal or a new tunic seems like abundance. You thank them. You might even feel genuine appreciation. That is how thoroughly the system corrupts perception. You are grateful for receiving less than the minimum you deserve, and the master gets to feel virtuous without actually providing justice. Holidays are complicated. During certain Roman festivals, there are temporary reversals. Saturnalia, for instance, where slaves supposedly get to act free for a day. They eat at the table. They're served by masters. It is meant to be playful, carnivalesque. In reality, it is an unpleasant reminder of everything you don't have the other 364 days. And it is not real reversal. You are allowed to pretend freedom under strict conditions. And the next day, hierarchy snaps back into place even harder. The temporary loosening makes the normal chains more apparent. Some slaves dread festivals because the contrast is too painful. Others participate desperately, grabbing at brief hours of something approximating human treatment. Either way, it is not liberation. It is a pressure valve that releases just enough tension to prevent the system from exploding. Public executions of slaves are spectacles. When a slave is executed, it is not done quietly. It is done in public, often with elaborate cruelty, designed to entertain and intimidate simultaneously. You might be forced to watch other slaves be executed. Required attendance. You stand there as someone is crucified, burned, torn apart by animals. You watch them die slowly, screaming, and you are supposed to learn from this. Supposed to internalize the message that this is your fate if you step out of line. The psychological impact of watching this is immense. You are traumatized, but you can't process the trauma. There is no grief counseling for slaves. No acknowledgement that watching people die horribly might affect you. You are just expected to go back to work, to serve dinners, to smile if your master is in a good mood. The horror you witnessed is compartmentalized, shoved down, added to the accumulated weight of trauma you are carrying. Informants exist within slave communities. Rome encourages slaves to report on each other. If you reveal another slave's plan to escape or rebel, you might get rewarded, a better position, extra food, maybe even freedom. This creates an atmosphere of paranoia. You can't trust anyone. That person you thought was a friend might be reporting your conversations to the overseer. That slave who seems sympathetic might be gathering information to trade for favors. This destroys solidarity. Slaves should band together, should support each other against shared oppression. But the system makes that dangerous. Trust becomes risky. Friendship becomes a vulnerability, so you isolate. You keep secrets, you survive alone. And Rome wins because a divided slave population is easier to control than a unified one. Medical experimentation happens. Roman physicians and proto-scientists sometimes use slaves as test subjects. You have a growth, a tumor, some medical condition. A physician wants to try a new procedure. You are not asked for consent. You are just taken and operated on. No anesthesia, crude instruments, experimenting on you to gain knowledge that will be used to treat free Romans. You are a medical guinea pig, and if you die during the procedure, well, that is unfortunate, but not illegal. Vivisection occurred. There are historical accounts of physicians dissecting living slaves to study anatomy. Just cutting into conscious people to see how bodies work internally. The screaming was noted as inconvenient, but not enough to stop the practice. Scientific advancement built on torture, and Romans saw nothing wrong with this, because slaves weren't fully human in their eyes. Just convenient research material. Breeding programs existed on some large estates. Masters wanting to increase their slave population without buying more would force slaves to reproduce. You are paired with someone not by choice, but by order. Produce children. Increase the labor force. Your reproduction is managed like livestock breeding. Who you have children with, when, how often, all determined by someone else's economic calculations. Women in these situations have no reproductive autonomy whatsoever. Forced pregnancy. Forced childbirth. Then the child is taken and raised by other slaves or raised by you, but owned by your master. You don't get to parent in any meaningful way. You give birth, and then you go back to work. The child is a product. You are the production facility. That is, the calculation. Male slaves in breeding programs are reduced to biological function. You are ordered to impregnate female slaves. It is rape, systematically mandated by the system. Refusal means punishment. Compliance means you are participating in the violation of someone else, which creates moral injury. There is no good choice. You are being used to perpetuate the system that is destroying you. Suicide is common enough that Romans write about how to prevent it. Slaves in the mines are watched carefully because many try to kill themselves. Starvation, hanging, walking into machinery, provoking guards into fatal violence. When your life is unrelenting agony, death becomes appealing. Not because you want to die, because you want the suffering to stop. And death is the only exit available. Masters view slaves' suicide as property damage. They're annoyed. You've destroyed their investment. They might punish other slaves for not preventing it. There is no examination of what drove someone to choose death. No recognition that maybe the conditions are intolerable. Just frustration at the economic loss. Some slaves are stopped from suicide attempts and punished. You try to hang yourself. You are cut down, resuscitated, then beaten for attempting to destroy property. You didn't escape. You just proved that not even death is entirely yours to choose. Even your exit from this nightmare is subject to someone else's approval. Language barriers add another layer of misery. If you are enslaved from a foreign land and don't speak Latin, communication is impossible at first. Orders come in sounds you don't understand. You fail to comply, not from disobedience but from confusion. You are punished anyway. No one cares that you don't understand. You should understand. That is your problem to solve. You learn Latin through pain, wrong response, beaten. Didn't understand the command, beaten. Hesitated because you are trying to pass unfamiliar sounds, beaten. Eventually you pick up enough to survive, but you never learn properly. Your Latin is broken, heavily accented, limited. Free Romans mock this. They imitate your accent. They laugh at your mistakes. They use your linguistic struggles as evidence that you are inferior, stupid, barely human. For enslaved people who spoke other languages, there is the additional loss of linguistic connection to identity. You spoke Greek, Aramaic, Celtic, Punic. That language held your memories, your culture, your sense of self. Now you are forced to think and speak in the language of your oppressor. Your native language fades from disuse. You forget words, forget phrases. Eventually, you might forget the language entirely. Another part of yourself erased. Literacy creates strange dynamics. If you are literate, you are valuable, but you are also dangerous. You can read correspondence, contracts, records. You might understand things your master doesn't want you to know. So literate slaves are watched more carefully. Your skill increases your worth and your surveillance simultaneously. You are trusted with important tasks, but never fully trusted. Some literate slaves become secretaries, scribes, accountants. You are handling sensitive information, managing finances, reading and writing letters on your master's behalf. You know intimate details of your master's business and personal life. You could expose secrets, embezzle money, forge documents. The paranoia around literate slaves is constant. Your intelligence makes you useful and suspect in equal measure. Illiterate slaves face different problems. If you can't read, you can't check if the contracts about you are accurate. Can't verify what you are told. Can't access any information that might help you. You are dependent on others to interpret the world. This creates vulnerability to deception. You are told the law says something. Is it true? You can't check. You are told you were sold for a certain reason. Is that accurate? You can't verify. Illiteracy makes you easier to control through information manipulations. Religious restrictions applied unevenly. Some masters allowed slaves to worship freely. Others forbade it or mandated specific religious practices. You are from Egypt. You worship Isis. Your master is Roman, worships the state gods. You are forbidden from practicing your religion, forced to participate in rituals for gods you don't believe in. Your spiritual life is another arena of control. Syncretism happens, you adapt. You find ways to worship your gods while appearing to comply with Roman religion. You identify Roman gods with your own. You practice in secret. It is cultural survival through subterfuge, but it is also loss. The religion you knew transforms under pressure. It has to become smaller, quieter, hidden. The open communal worship of your former life is impossible. You are left with fragments and secrets. Some slaves convert to their master's religion, genuinely or strategically. It might offer protection, might create a sense of shared community with the oppressor, might be the only way to access any spiritual comfort. This creates identity confusion. Are you betraying your roots? Are you surviving? Both. The line between strategic adaptation and erasure of self is blurry and painful to navigate. Aging accelerates under slave conditions. You are 30, but you look 50. Years of malnutrition, overwork, stress, lack of medical care. Your hair goes grey early. Your teeth fall out. Your skin weathers. Your joints degrade. You are aging in fast forward, watching your body deteriorate decades before it naturally would. Free Romans of your age look vibrant. You look like you are at death's door, because you are. This premature aging affects how you are treated. You are seen as used up, worn out, past usefulness. Even if you are still relatively young chronologically, you are evaluated on apparent age. You look old, you are old. You are phased out of hard labour, not because you've earned rest, but because you are no longer capable. It is not retirement, it is obsolescence. The generational trauma is immense. If you were born into slavery, you've never known anything else. Your parents were slaves, your grandparents. Everyone you are descended from. You have no memory of freedom, no stories of when things were different. Slavery is not what happened to your people. It is what your people are. That has been the message your whole life. Breaking out of that psychological prison is nearly impossible when you have no reference point for an alternative. Children born into slavery learn to be slaves. It is not just labour, it is posture, tone, deference, silence. They learn to flinch before the hit comes, learn to anticipate displeasure, learn to make themselves small and forgettable. These aren't natural childhood behaviours, they're trained responses. Children are being shaped into perfect slaves, and it starts from infancy. By age 5, they're already deeply conditioned. By age 10, the conditioning is nearly unbreakable. Play is restricted. Free children play. They have toys, games, freedom to be children. Slave children work. If they play, it is in tiny, stolen moments. They might have a small toy they made from scraps, hidden from adults, because even play might be seen as shirking work. Their childhood is abbreviated, sometimes erased entirely. They go from infant to labourer, with almost nothing in between. Education for slave children is purely functional. You are taught a skill, not for your enrichment, but for your owner's profit. If you are learning to read, it is because literate slaves are valuable. If you are learning a craft, it is because skilled workers are worth more. There is no learning for the sake of curiosity. No education for personal growth. Every lesson has an economic purpose. You are being programmed, not educated. This creates strange situations where slave children might be more educated in specific areas than free children, but utterly ignorant in others. You can do complex accounting but have no idea that other societies exist without slavery. You can read Greek philosophy, but have never been told that you are as human as the philosopher. Your education is carefully curated to make you useful while keeping you subordinate. Disabled slaves who can't be productive face disposal. If you are born with a disability or develop one that prevents standard labor, your value plummets. Some masters keep disabled slaves in minimal roles, but others abandon them, leave them to die, sell them for almost nothing to whoever will take them. There is no social safety net for slaves, no care for those who can't contribute economically. Blind slaves might be used for simple tasks, working mills, turning grinds, anything that doesn't require sight. It is a grim existence, working in darkness at repetitive tasks. Deaf slaves face communication barriers that make orders unclear, which leads to frequent punishment for disobedience. That is really just misunderstanding. Physically disabled slaves are given the worst jobs or no jobs, left to beg for scraps from other slaves who barely have enough themselves. Mental illness and neurodivergence go unrecognized and unpunished. You have what we'd now call depression, PTSD, anxiety disorders, trauma responses. Romans see this as moral weakness or demonic possession. You are beaten for being lazy when you are actually suffering from trauma-induced inability to function. You are punished for behaviors that are symptoms of conditions no one in your era understands. Some slaves dissociate, so completely they appear cognitively impaired. It is a protective response to overwhelming trauma, but it is interpreted as stupidity. You are given the worst tasks, treated even more brutally, which worsens the dissociation. It is a feedback loop of trauma and abuse with no intervention. Natural disasters add extra precarity. Earthquake damages the estate. Slaves are the last to be dug out of rubble. Fire breaks out. Slaves are sent in to save valuables before escaping themselves. Many die flood, drought, volcano. In every crisis, slaves are expendable. Their survival is the lowest priority. Save the master, save the family, save the property. Then, if there is time and inclination, maybe save the slaves. During the eruption of Vesuvius that buried Pompeii, archaeologists have found skeletons of slaves in telling positions, chained in cellars, locked in service areas. They couldn't escape because they were literally locked in place. Their masters fled or died, and the slaves died because no one bothered to unlock their chains. Their skeletons remain frozen in positions of desperation, hands reaching toward locked doors. Concrete evidence of exactly how expendable slaves were. War brings different horrors. When Rome goes to war, slaves don't fight typically. They're support. You are hauling equipment, setting up camps, preparing food, digging latrines. You are doing back-breaking labor in a war zone. You might get killed by enemy action, and no one cares. You are not a soldier. Your death isn't counted as a casualty. You just disappear from the records. If your side loses, you might be captured by the enemy and enslaved again. Same circumstances, different master. If your side wins, nothing changes for you. You are still a slave. You hold their equipment to victory, and your reward is going back to the estate and hauling equipment there. War's outcome is irrelevant to your status. You lose either way. Some slaves are used as human shields, literally placed in front of soldiers to absorb arrows, stones, initial assault. You are armor made of flesh, expendable protection for people who are considered to actually matter. If you survive, no medal, no recognition, just back to normal servitude. If you die, you are not mourned, just replaced. Technological advances are built on slave labor. Romans developed impressive engineering, aqueducts, roads, concrete, architectural innovations. Every single one is constructed by slaves. The engineer gets credit, the slaves get nothing. Your hands built the structures that tourists photograph 2,000 years later, and no one remembers you did it. This erasure is systematic. The slave who figured out a more efficient construction method doesn't get recognition. The idea is attributed to the overseer or the engineer. Innovation by slaves is stolen and credited to free Romans. You are not seen as capable of intelligence or creativity. So even when you demonstrate it, the credit goes elsewhere. Mining innovations are a perfect example. Slaves' working mines develop techniques for extracting ore more efficiently, for shoring up tunnels more effectively. They're the ones in the mines, the ones who understand the practical reality. But any improvement is credited to the mine owner or engineer, never to the slaves who actually invented it. Their expertise is extracted along with the ore. Agricultural techniques, refined by field slaves. Same story. You know the land. You know what works. You've been doing this for years. You develop better planting strategies, better irrigation methods. The landowner takes credit, presents it as their innovation. You are erased from the history of your own expertise. Literary works mention slaves constantly, but rarely as full characters, their background. The slave who opens the door, the slave who brings wine, they're props in someone else's story. Even when Roman playwrights write about slaves, it is usually for comedy. The clever slave who tricks the master, haha, very funny. It is fiction. Real slaves who tricked masters were crucified. This literary presence, as absence, shapes historical memory. We have thousands of Roman texts. Slaves appear in most of them, but we don't hear their voices. We hear Roman perspectives on slaves. We get masters' opinions, philosophers' theories, playwrights' caricatures. The actual slave experience is filtered through the lens of their oppressors. It is like learning about prisoners exclusively from reading guards' reports. Few slave voices survive, mostly from freed slaves who became literate and successful enough to write. But these are exceptions, and they're still filtered through Roman education and expectations. A freedman writing about slavery has to be careful, too critical, and they risk social punishment, too honest, and they might not get published or preserved. So even the rare slave perspectives that exist are constrained. Archaeological evidence tells stories that texts don't. Slave quarters excavated from Pompeii, tiny rooms, no decoration, minimal possessions. Skeletons showing repetitive stress injuries, malnutrition, signs of violence. Shackles and chains found in abundance. Graffiti scratched into walls by slaves, desperate messages, names, prayers. The material record confirms what the texts minimize. DNA evidence from ancient skeletons can sometimes show geographical origin. A slave buried in Rome, but DNA shows ancestry from North Africa or Northern Europe. They were taken from home, brought hundreds or thousands of miles, died far from everything they knew. Their bones tell a story of displacement that no text records. Isotope analysis of teeth reveals childhood location. Your teeth form in childhood, incorporating minerals from local water and food. Analysis can show where you spent your early years. A slave skeleton in Italy, with isotopes showing they grew up in Syria. Stolen child enslaved died far from home. The science reveals individual tragedies that history didn't bother recording. Economic records, the ones that survive, show the scale. Massive numbers of slaves bought and sold. Price lists, inventories. Depreciation calculations as slaves age. Replacement schedules. It is all there in the accounting records. The bureaucratic documentation of mass enslavement. Thousands of names in ledgers. Each one a person. Almost all of them forgotten. Demographic modelling based on available data suggests that at Rome's peak, 20 to 30% of Italy's population was enslaved. 1 in 4 people. That is millions of individuals at any given time. Over the centuries of Roman slavery, tens of millions of people. The scale is almost incomprehensible. Tens of millions of lives. Stolen. Brutalized. Forgotten. Resistance took many forms. The big revolts get remembered, Spartacus and the massive uprisings. But daily resistance was constant, working slowly, accidentally breaking expensive items, stealing food, faking illness, teaching children to resist subtly, preserving culture and language despite suppression, helping other slaves escape. Every small act of defiance is resistance. Some slaves poisoned their masters. It is documented. Slaves with kitchen access had opportunity and motive. Masters paranoid about poison made slaves taste their food first. If the food was poisoned, the slave died. If it wasn't, the meal proceeded. Slaves used as food testers. Dying to protect masters from other slaves. The system cannibalized itself. Arson was another form of resistance. Fire destroys property. A slave who'd had enough might burn down the master's house, the storehouse, the fields. They'd die for it, but they'd take something with them. These acts are recorded as criminal, but rarely with any exploration of what drove someone to choose destructive death over continued slavery. Running away, even when it almost certainly failed, was resistance. You knew you'd probably be caught. You ran anyway, because a few days of freedom were worth the price, because dying in the attempt was preferable to never trying. The recapture rate was high. The punishments were horrific. People ran anyway. That says everything about how unbearable slavery was. Cultural preservation happened in secret. Slaves from the same region found each other. They spoke their native language in whispers. They remembered stories from home. They kept cultural practices alive in hidden ways. This is how some Roman mystery cults formed. Enslaved people from Eastern Mediterranean, bringing their religions and adapting them to survive in Rome. The cult of Mithras, for example, attracted many slaves and freedmen. The cult of Isis, similarly. These weren't originally Roman gods. They were brought by enslaved people and adapted into Roman context. The religious landscape of Rome was partly shaped by the spiritual needs of enslaved populations, maintaining connection to their origins. Music and oral traditions were passed down. You couldn't write, but you could sing. Couldn't own instruments, but you could make rhythm with whatever was available. Slave songs existed, though almost none survived, because no one bothered to record them, but they existed. Ways of communicating, of maintaining identity, of expressing the inexpressible. Dance too, in rare moments of leisure. Dancing, movement that is yours, expressing something beyond labor. It is freedom in the smallest sense. Your body moving for joy, not for work. Rare, fleeting. But those moments mattered. They're tiny assertions of humanity in a system designed to deny it. Humor must have existed among slaves. Dark humor, gallows humor. Jokes about masters, mockery of the system. Laughter as pressure release, as coping mechanism, as subtle rebellion. None of this is recorded. Masters wouldn't have found it funny, but it must have happened. Humans use humor to survive horror. Slaves were human. Therefore, they used humor. The loss of all these voices is staggering. Millions of people with thoughts, feelings, stories, jokes, songs, loves, fears. All of it existed. Almost none of it was recorded. We know they were human. We know they had rich internal lives. But we can't access most of it. History is written by victors and oppressors. The slaves remain mostly silent in the record, not because they had nothing to say, but because no one with power to record thought their words mattered. Modern attempts to recover this history are challenging. We piece together scattered evidence, archaeological findings, the rare voice that survived, analysis of biased texts to read between the lines, comparative studies of other slave systems, anthropological insights. We're reconstructing an ocean from droplets. It is important work, but it is incomplete. It will always be incomplete. The emotional work of studying this history is heavy, reading about systematic brutality for hours, confronting the scale of suffering, recognizing that this was normal, accepted, legal for centuries. It is difficult knowledge, necessary, but difficult. The people who lived through this deserve to be remembered, even though remembering hurts. For descendants of enslaved people, this history carries additional weight. These aren't abstract victims, they're ancestors. People who suffered so that future generations could exist. The trauma is generational, genetic possibly. Epigenetics suggests severe trauma can affect gene expression across generations. The scars of Roman slavery might echo in descendants' DNA even now, and Rome isn't unique. Every major civilization practiced slavery in some form. Different specifics, but the core dehumanization is universal. Rome is just well documented. Other societies left less evidence, but the suffering was just as real. Millions more people in other places, other times, all enduring similar horrors. The global scale of historical slavery is almost beyond comprehension. Knowing this history makes contemporary injustice more visible. The patterns persist. Maybe not chattel slavery at the same scale, but exploitation continues. Human trafficking, prison labor, economic coercion, debt bondage, different names, similar mechanisms. Learning about Roman slavery isn't just about history. It is about recognizing patterns that continue. This isn't meant to be depressing to the point of paralysis. It is meant to be motivating. They survived. They resisted. They maintained humanity against systems designed to destroy it. Their strength is astonishing. Their resilience is inspiring. And their memory demands that we do better, that we build systems that respect human dignity. that we recognize and dismantle exploitation wherever it exists. So remember them. Remember the field slave who worked until their body gave out. Remember the mind slave who died in darkness. Remember the household slave who smiled while dying inside. Remember the child born into chains. Remember the mother who lost her children to sale. Remember the man beaten for looking up. Remember the woman who chose death over continued rape. Remember them all. Not as victims only, as people, as humans who loved, hoped, suffered, endured, and sometimes resisted. As people who built civilization while being crushed by it. As people whose names are mostly lost, but whose labor shaped the world we inherited. Remember them accurately, completely, honestly, and use that memory as fuel. Fuel to recognize injustice. Fuel to oppose exploitation. Fuel to build better systems. Fuel to defend human dignity. The best way to honor people who suffered under slavery is to make sure it never happens again, in any form, under any name, for any reason. That is what it meant to be a Roman slave. That is the history we must remember. Not the sanitized version, not the minimized version. The full, brutal, honest reality. Because they lived it. The least we can do is remember it, all of it, forever.